I'll be sharing with you our journey as we went about looking at this issue of autonomous mobility for Singapore and how we can introduce it as a means of transport to enhance mobility in Singapore. But of course, I think before I start, it's useful to give you all, I think, an idea of why we are going about exploring this whole notion of autonomous mobility. I think many of you here, I suspect, are from Singapore, so I don't need to tell you, but I also see, I think, quite a number of friends from overseas. But essentially, I think most of you would know Singapore is a very small island. So we face challenges in terms of having limited land area. We can't afford to grow our road networks as our population and economic activities grow. So we need to tackle that one challenge, how we can provide better transport given our limited land area. Another challenge that we face is our limited manpower. I don't know how many of you will know, but a lot of our bus drivers in Singapore, for example, are actually from overseas. We have about, I think, half of them actually that are from overseas. So the remaining half that are from Singapore, a large number of them are in their late 50s and more. So in the next generation or so, again, we'll face a very big manpower crunch when we're talking about drivers. And the same picture repeats itself in other industries, logistics, in our ports and so on. Of course, as we deal with these two constraints, we are also faced with increasing demand for transport in Singapore. Our population, our economic activities are growing, so that places added demand on our transport network. But beyond that, it's not a very smooth increase in demand, but rather the increase in demand is actually very diverse because we have an aging population, so the elderly have different needs. But the youth as well have different needs when it comes to transport. I think they're used to calling for transport on their smartphones today. So this leads us really to this challenge statement that you see on the screen, where we hope to achieve the highest possible public, shared and active transport mode share without increasing land take and manpower, and also to move freight and logistics in the most resource-efficient manner possible. So how does autonomous mobility fit into this vision and challenge statement that we have? So first of all, of course, I think with autonomous vehicles, what we hope to do is that we can, through the use of AVs, optimize the traffic flows because these vehicles can travel more closely to one another. That's one. But secondly, we are hoping that through the increase in convenience and accessibility brought about by autonomous vehicles, we can also encourage Singaporeans to shift away from private car ownership and take public and shared transport, especially at the first and last mile. The second aspect, of course, as I mentioned, because of the shortage of manpower that we face, AVs can help us to deal with this challenge. Finally, of course, I think many of you will know, with AVs, what we hope to do in the very long term is that through the elimination of human-related error, we can help bring down the number of traffic accidents in Singapore and enhance road safety. So very broadly, we saw this, the vision, we saw the challenges that we faced many years ago, and we saw the benefits that AVs can bring several years ago as well. So back in about 2013, 2014, we decided that we had to take action and do something, and we put in place this roadmap that you see on screen right now. It's a roadmap that looks at how we can use AVs for the public benefit. So if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, these are the 4 tracks that we've decided to focus on. First, in terms of providing fixed route scheduled services kind of transport. Secondly, in terms of providing your mobility on demand kind of transport. So these two are more of your people mover transport. The next 2 tabs that you see below are freight and utility, and here we are hoping to use AVs to help us deliver freight in a more efficient manner, and of course also in terms of using AVs to help with utility operations, and by that I mean road sweeping, rubbish collection, that kind of stuff where the operations can be automated. So we have a 3-phase roadmap in terms of how we want to introduce autonomous vehicles. We are today really in phase 1, where we're talking about trialing and test building the technology in certain environments. And I think some of you may know we have trials in several areas in Singapore. One north, which is a business innovation district, I think in the center west of Singapore. We have AVs being trialed there. In Sentosa as well, in Jurong Island as well, islands to the south of Singapore, and at our universities, of course. So we're expanding these test beds as and when the trial developers are keen to push the boundaries of their technology. So today I think we have about 100 kilometers of roads where these AVs can run around. Actually no, more than 100 kilometers. The 100 kilometers just refers to the one north test bed that we have. But if you take in Sentosa, Jurong Island, actually there's a lot more space that AVs can test in Singapore. What we're hoping to do, of course, is that when the technology is ready or more ready, we want to do limited deployments of these AVs in some of our towns. And of course, then progressively, as the technology improves and matures, we hope to then go to phase 3, where we can roll out the deployment of these AVs island-wide. So these are just some examples of the ongoing trials that we have for each of the mobility concepts. I must say that this is not an exhaustive list. In fact, every time I look at this slide, I think I get reminded that there are more and more folks trialing AVs here in Singapore. So this is just an example of some of the trials that are ongoing. On the top, you'll see the trials that are taking place for fixed route scheduled services, kind of bus operations. And these are really, for LTA, the kind of technology that we really hope to see succeed and deploy, because these help us to move around people in a much more efficient manner. So we have trials at NTU with smaller shuttles from Navia to get there. In the middle, you see 2 trials that are testing 12-meter public buses, and these are really buses that the kind of buses that you see on our streets today, and we hope to use autonomous technology to really automate them. On the right as well, I think you see the EasyMar shuttle that today is being run in Gardens by the Bay. And if you go to NUS today, in fact, it's also on trial, and the public can actually take this particular shuttle at NUS. I think it operates at a certain time of the day, but if you go, there's a little kiosk, so you can download an app that you can use to hail to find out more about these shuttles. At the bottom, you also see trials that are taking place on the mobility on demand kind of concepts. So in the one-off area, we have companies like Active, as well as research institutions like Smart testing their AVs in that area. In Sentosa as well, we have a trial by ST Engineering that's testing their autonomous minibus. And again, the trial is actually open to the public right now, so if any of you are interested, just go to Sentosa. And again, there's an app that you can download to hail this on-demand shuttle, and these shuttles can bring you around the island. In terms of freight as well, we have an ongoing trial where we have partnered with Toyota Shusho as well as Scania to explore autonomous truck platooning technology. And really, this was something that we thought could be an interim solution before fully autonomous trucks came about. So this was something that we looked at 4 or 5 years ago, and the trial is still ongoing right now. We are hoping, of course, that as the technology progresses from a truck platooning kind of concept, where today you still have a human driver leading the first truck and the follower trucks being autonomous, we hope that, of course, with the advent of autonomous trucking technology, we can remove the human driver altogether. Finally, on utility operations, there are also some consortiums that are now developing road sweepers, autonomous road sweepers for us, and again, we hope to test that out on our roads fairly soon. So we, I think, have been quite excited about the promise of the technology, and given the progress of the trials that have been taking place so far, we have actually decided to look ahead already to phase 2 of our roadmap. Some of you may know, we said 2 years ago that we are planning to undertake a pilot deployment of autonomous vehicles in 3 of our towns, Punggol, Tengah, and the Jurong Innovation District, sometime in the early 2020s. So what we hope to see through this pilot deployment is to have AV buses provide fixed route scheduled bus services, as well as smaller capacity shuttles that will provide your shared on-demand shuttle services within the geofences. But of course, it's not just about the technology. I think to make sure that the technology can be deployed, I think we are also very mindful that we need to put in place a lot of enablers. And I mean, we're talking about AI after all, so we need to make sure that the technology can be rolled out in a very safe manner. Right, so how can we do this? I mean, we've been looking at several areas. First, of course, is things like infrastructure and systems. What sorts of infrastructure do we need to put in place to facilitate the deployment of AVs? I think for many people around the world today, what we're hoping to see are AVs that can operate based on systems on board, without relying on external connectivity, because the risk of connectivity being cut and the AV having challenges, I think that's not a risk that developers want to take. So we're hoping that AVs can, as far as possible, operate just based on onboard systems. But of course, I think we do recognize that infrastructure is important in terms of enhancing the capabilities of these AVs. For instance, if there's a, say, traffic jam 10 kilometers ahead and the AV can be given that information, that allows them to plan a different route to avoid the traffic jam, as one example. Right, so infrastructure and systems, I think one area that I think we're looking at together with our partner agencies in Singapore like URA, HDB, etc. of course. Regulations and standards, another area that we're looking quite closely at to make sure that we can enhance safety, and I'll give a few more examples in the later slides that I have. Public acceptability is another area that I think we're quite mindful of. I mean, in terms of making sure that Singaporeans are comfortable with the technology, making sure that they're willing to take the autonomous vehicles when the time comes for these vehicles to be rolled out. I think that's another area that we're mindful of. But together with that, of course, I think the previous speaker mentioned jobs, how will AI impact on jobs? I think we're also very mindful of the potential disruption that autonomous vehicles could bring to our workforce, and we're really looking at ways in which we can make sure that we upskill and reskill our workers as and when necessary. But I think the picture is also not all a negative one. At the end of the day, I think as with all the previous disruptions brought about by technology, as some jobs may be disrupted, new jobs will be created. And I think the one message that I hope people will take away is that when you're talking about autonomous vehicles as well, there will always be a need for the human to be in the loop in some way or another. So maybe in the initial days you'll still need a safety operator on board a bus. But after a while, when the technology is mature, the safety operator can be removed, but you'll probably still need a customer service officer on board the bus just to make sure that people are comfortable. Right? That's perhaps in the short term, next 10, 15 years or so, maybe. After that, we probably don't need a human to be on board the bus, but we still need a human to be back in the operation center to remotely monitor the operations of these AVs. So these are just some examples of jobs that will potentially be created as a result. So I mentioned earlier that I'll share a little bit more about some of the things that we're doing to make sure that AVs can be deployed safely. So one of the things that we have done in Singapore is to develop a testing regime for AVs. I think we are one of the very few jurisdictions in the world today that require AVs to be tested by LTA, the traffic police, before we allow the AVs to run on our roads. Actually, I suspect we may be the one or two jurisdictions in the world that actually requires this. So we launched this Center of Excellence in Testing and Research of AVs at NTU back in 2016 to help us to develop the testing and certification methodologies. We also built the Sichuan AV Test Center, and that's the test center that you see in the picture over there. Again, to provide an environment for AV developers as well as LTA and traffic police to test the AVs based on local traffic scenarios. So unlike, I think, the test circuits you see overseas where you're talking about AVs running thousands of kilometers for endurance testing, our test circuit is a little bit different. It's really more to replicate key elements of the Singapore road network to allow AVs to be able to be tested against these key characteristics. So we have this milestone testing regime in place for quite a number of years now. So all the AVs that you see running around in Singapore today, they have been tested by LTA and the traffic police, I can assure you of that. It's a 3-stage testing regime where milestone one is a relatively more simple test, I suppose, where when the AVs pass these tests, they can then go into test states like 1 North, Sentosa, and so on. But we also have additional milestone 2 tests that the AVs must take before they are allowed to go into more complex traffic environments. And then, of course, there's a milestone 3 test as well, where the AVs have to take before we even allow them to take out the safety operator on board. We have also sought to develop standards to facilitate deployment, and I think all of you are quite familiar how important standards are when we're talking about rolling out a new technology. When we first looked at deployment, I think we were hoping that there could be international standards that are out there that we could adapt and adopt for Singapore, but I think the global conversation wasn't quite there yet, so we felt that we had to push ahead and start this conversation here in Singapore. So with the help of industry, many of I suspect some of the companies may well be based be here in this room, but with the help of companies both locally as well as from overseas, we developed this 4-part technical reference that we released earlier this year. And this technical reference really covers 4 areas. The basic behavior that we expect AVs to demonstrate on our roads, kind of like a highway code, I suppose, for AVs. The second bit is really the safety aspect, functional safety. What do we expect the AV to be able to demonstrate in terms of safety requirements? Third, of course, cybersecurity, another very important aspect when we're talking about AVs that they're likely to be connected in some way or another. And finally, vehicular data types and formats. in terms of the data format for data that needs to be exchanged between vehicles, the V2V aspects as well, between the vehicle and infrastructure, V2I as well, right? So this is something that we have put out, but we are still seeking feedback from industry on this. I mean, we know that this is just, in a sense, an early first draft, and what we're hoping industry can do is to give us further feedback so that we can refine this technical reference. And eventually, if the technology is a bit more mature, the technical reference is more or less ready, we then hope to upgrade the technical reference to a Singapore standard. Of course, I think we have to also review and revise our regulatory regime in tandem as we allow deployment. So we took a look at, I think, our Road Traffic Act a couple of years ago, and clearly, I mean, again, this is, if you look at the Road Traffic Act equivalents in many other countries, the laws were made for a time when people didn't expect AVs. So a lot of the laws in place in many countries says that vehicles must have a steering wheel, for instance. A vehicle must be driven by a human in the driver's seat. These are laws that are in place in many, many countries. And of course, AVs don't quite fit in that kind of mold. So we have to review our Road Traffic Act and think about how we can perhaps more nimbly adjust our regulations to allow us to facilitate the trials and deployment of AVs. So we amended our Road Traffic Act back in February of 2017, and we put in place what we call a regulatory sandbox to facilitate AV trials and deployment. And what that means really is that the regulatory sandbox allows the Minister of Transport to allow new regulations to be made as well as existing regulations to be amended in a more nimble way. Because traditionally you need to go back to Parliament before you can change the laws. Now I think the power has been delegated only for 5 years to the Minister of Transport and to the Transport Ministry to do this. At the end of the 5 years, we then have to go back to Parliament to say, well, do we want an extension or can some of these rules be permanently enacted into law, right? But some of the new rules that we put in place include allowing authorizations to be issued for AVs, things like there being a requirement for insurance coverage, the safety operator having to hold certain valid local driving license, etc., and AVs having to maintain black box recorders and to log all their testing activities. And I think there are many more rules that were put in place, but I won't come in here. Of course, one of the things that we do require, and again, I think we may be one of the few jurisdictions in the world that require this. We ask that the AV developers submit data to LTA for real-time tracking of their AVs at all times, whenever their AVs are running on the roads. So the data submitted includes whether the AV is driving autonomously or manually, what speed are they, what's their position, etc. So this allows, I think, LTA to have better situation awareness of all the AVs in Singapore. And for most of them, their authorization limits them to certain geofences. So again, we make sure that they're running only in those geofences at the speed limits that they're supposed to drive in. And again, I think this is important from our perspective to make sure that we can really give the public that assurance that the authorities are fully on top of the trials, and we're making efforts to make sure that these trials are being conducted in a very safe manner. Okay. So this is the last slide I have. We are hosting the Intelligent Transport Systems World Congress in Singapore in October, where there are easily several dozen speakers that are talking about autonomous vehicles. So if there's interest from any of you in learning more about autonomous vehicles, please do come join us at the ITS World Congress in October. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.